Hey, hi, how you going? It's your main Palworld, and today we're going to take a look at the 10 most essential powers that every player is going to want to have access to as they start making their way towards the end game. Let's check it out. Okay, so the powers on today's list are here because of their general utility in the end game and not necessarily their combat strength or their work suit abilities. And the reason for that is pretty much any power can get the job done in those domains, so there's not really much point in singling out any given fighter or worker. For example, Bastigor is certainly a great combat power to have, but I'm not really comfortable calling it a must-have when every other top combat power is going to get the job done just as well, or at least close to it. And as always, if you guys enjoy this content, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It all really helps support the channel a lot, and remember to try out the new hype button, which helps boost small creators. Alright, but before we get into the top 10, I do have just a couple of honorable mentions being the best fishing powers. So we're going to look at Walaska and Jelliet for that. Now, you could also use Gelroy instead of Jelliet's. They're going to do the same thing. But Walaska's ability is going to make it so that the fishing minigame starts with the capture gauge higher, and it's also going to make it so that that bar fills up faster. So this guy's just going to make you able to complete fishing a lot more efficiently. And then the Jelliet is going to make it so that you get more loot while fishing. So if you have 4 of these, you're going to get a ton of loot. So you really want to be going for 4 of these and 1 Walaska, and that's going to be your optimal fishing setup. Now, the reason I haven't really been able to actually put these guys into the list is because I don't really feel like they're necessary for completing the fishing game. And the fishing game itself isn't even really a necessary mechanic. So you could go the entire game without doing that mini game at all. It is a really good way to get the rainbow passives in the first place, but even without the Walaska, you're still going to be able to do that. So I didn't really feel like these guys earned a spot in the top 10. But moving into the first entry on this list, we've already got a new addition from the Tides of Terraria update in Breloha. And to clarify, there's not a particular order to this list. It's not the most essential to the least essential or anything like that. I'm just going to be numbering them to make it easier to follow along with. But Breloha has an incredibly essential ability which is going to be useful for all players, but especially those of you who are in or reaching the end game, because it's going to reduce the time it takes for your pals assigned to a breeding farm to produce eggs by up to 50%. And trust me on this one, that is going to add up to a lot of time saved and a substantial amount of extra egg production, because Palworld's end game can often feel like a creature breeding simulator, given the amount of time you will spend breeding to get those perfect pals. I mean, Breloha itself is going to be an example of this, because if you want to get the most out of its ability, you'll need to condense it up to 4 stars, which means that you need a total of 116 extra Breloha just to max out the one that you actually want to use. And it's a good thing that we're talking about this early, because the same is going to be true for all of the pals on today's list, given that to max out the efficacy on any pal's partner skill, you need to condense them all the way up to 4 stars. So it's going to be 4 to reach level 1, and then 16 for level 2, 32 for level 3, and then 64 for the final level, totaling the 116 that I just mentioned. Now, if you want to get your hands on a Breloha, you can only find them in the wild on this northeastern island, or you can use one of the many breeding combinations available that you'll be seeing on screen now. Next up is going to be all of the elemental conversion powers. Now, I have included these guys as a set because they'll all do a very similar thing by changing the player's damage to a particular elemental type, but you will eventually want to get your hands on at least 1 POW per element. And notably, not all damage conversion powers are the same. Some of them will need to be mounted in order to get their effect, while others need to fight alongside you as your active POW. There's pros and cons to this, but the biggest difference is that not only do you get an elemental swap, but there's also a raw damage bonus that comes along with it. For the pals that need to fight alongside you, they'll contribute a 10% raw damage boost to the player, and they're also going to contribute autonomous damage throughout the fight because they're your active pal, whereas the mounted pals will require manual handling from the player, but provide up to a 20% flat damage boost. Now, there are 2 special exceptions to this, however, which are Frostallion and Frostallion Noct, who each give the player a 40% damage boost because they've also got this extra little clause in their ability. The most relevant of these pals in the current meta are Wixen, who's one of the best ways to speedrun Bjorn and Bastigor, and Frostallion, who I just mentioned because it's great for Xenolord. However, as more content continues to be released, more and more of these pals will become relevant because we'll get new bosses to fight who require new elemental conversion types. Moving on, we've got Yakumo next, and this guy is the goodest boy because his ability is going to make it so that whenever you capture a pal in the wild, you have a 30% chance to pass along one of Yakumo's current passives to the captured pal. So even though this isn't a guarantee, it's certainly going to make it a lot easier to get some of the rarest passives such as Demon God, Swift, Remarkable Craftsmanship, or any of the Rainbow passives for that matter, onto your other pals that you're trying to capture, and it's especially useful for legendary pals that you can't acquire via breeding, such as Jetragon, Necromus, or Palladius. Now, there is often some confusion around this passive as to which abilities it can pass on, but the simplest way to remember is that it can only pass along passives that can be naturally acquired by the pal that you're capturing. Legend is the best example of this, and where I see most people going wrong, because Legend is a passive skill that can only be naturally acquired by the 6 legendary pals in the game, who will always come with that passive, so there's no point having Legend on your Yakumo because you can't pass this along to, say, a Wild Zoe. Same goes for other abilities like Invader or Siren of the Void, which only come from their respective raid bosses, so if you want any of these on your other pals, you're going to have to acquire them via breeding. So with this in mind, my recommendation would be to always keep a set of Yakumos in your pal box with as many of the rainbow passives as you can get, so that you can always pull the one out that you need for any given situation and then start passing those passives along. And if you want to get a Yakumo for yourself, you can capture them all over the Sakurajima Island. Now this next pal gets my vote for being the most underrated pal in the game, because this guy never gets any praise, the definition of an unsung hero. Without him, we wouldn't be able to have any of the strongest combat pals, we wouldn't have our best base pals. That's right, I'm talking about little old B-Guard. If you want to get your hands on some of these, they can be captured all over this central forest region, and you're going to need at least a couple of them condensed all the way up to 4 stars and put into a ranch so that they can produce honey, which is the only ingredient you need for making cakes that you can't buy with gold. And that's it, that's the extent of this pal's utility, but considering how essential cake is, and this is the only way to efficiently get honey for making said cake, it would be a crime to leave this pal off of the must-haves list. Next up, we've got another set of pals, but this time we're talking about all of the damage boosters. Now, once again, these guys are going to come in each of the different elemental types, but notably this time we actually don't have a dragon type just yet, so hopefully that's something that we're going to get soon in a future update. Now, if you condense these guys all the way up to 4 stars, you will get a 20% boost to attack, and notably it increases the pal's attack stat, not the damage done by moves of that element. So even if you're using moves like Holy Burst on a fire pal, you're still going to get the benefit from having these booster pals in your party. As you can see, there are a few elements that are doubled or even tripled up, as is the case for the fire element, for which you could use Finsider Ignis, Kelpsy Ignis, or Ruby, but ultimately my recommendation is that you get at least 4 pals from each element. Now, the reason I recommend that you have 4 is because this ability does stack. So for example, if I want to maximize the damage output of my Bastagor, then my party might look like 1 Bastagor and 4 Foxicles. That being said, for better or worse, the reality is it's often just better to increase the player's damage rather than the damage of the pal, and that's going to bring us to the next entry on this list, which is Gobfin. Now, I know every pal tamer and their direwolf is probably sick of hearing about this little blue cretin, but I would be remiss if I didn't include it, because it is going to lead to some of the highest damage outputs in the game, thanks to its partner skill Angry Shark. So this is going to increase the player damage by up to 20, and again, this one's also going to stack, so theoretically you could have 5 of these in party and get a 100% damage increase, but you typically only want 4 because it's better to have an active pal in your leading slot rather than that extra 20%. If you want to capture these guys, you can head on over to the Gobfin Turf Way Shrine where you'll find them in abundance. Continuing on, the next entry is Galeclaw, and this one is a little bit heartbreaking because the changes a few months ago meant that we no longer see our pals while using them as gliders, but nonetheless the pal effect is still applied and Galeclaw is a game changer. The nice thing is you can get these guys fairly early on in the game, and you can find them in the wild around the areas that you're seeing on screen now from roughly level 17 or so, and you can unlock the Galeclaw gloves at level 23 in the tech tree. But trust me on this one, once you go Galeclaw, you'll never go back, and it's especially potent when you combine it with the grapple hook for extra boosts of speed. It's also going to be an essential member of your team for completing difficult content like the level 60 oil rig, where you will need to move up and down very quickly to continue avoiding damage. Nearing the end now, we've got just 3 entries to go, and this next one is going to be Jetragon. Now, you could put either Jetragon or Xenolod here because both of them are going to be fantastic endgame mounts, but I'm going to focus on Jetragon because it's a lot easier to get. You can capture this guy over at -792, -320 on Mount Obsidian, and he is going to be one of the premium flying mounts, which is going to save you a ton of time while traveling around the map in the end game. And for the longest time, I resisted using this PAL because I just like the aesthetic of other PALs more, but once you give this guy a go, everything else feels like it's moving in slow motion. Next up, we've got Smokey, and I consider this guy to be essential as well because he is going to be the most efficient way to get your hands on chromite, which is a rare material you can only find on the Faybreak Island by digging it up from hidden nodes in the ground. Now, to find the nodes, you can either use a metal detector or Smokey's ability, but not only does Smokey help you find the chromite, he's also going to triple the amount of chromite you get from any given node. And I will say, of all of the PALs on today's list, Smokey is the most likely to fall off eventually because as they provide more and more updates to the game, we tend to get all of the old rare materials provided as farming sites that you can build within your base. So if we do ever get a farming site for chromite, then Smokey, adorable though he may be, will probably need to go the way of Old Yellow. But we finally made it to the last entry on this list, and this is yet another set of PALs, but this time I'm talking about the elemental drop rate increases. So each of these PALs is going to make it so that whenever you kill a PAL, you get increased drop rates up to 80% of any materials dropped by a PAL of that element. Now, I will say with this one, you probably don't need to go out and get one of each of these just yet. The only one that's particularly relevant, in my opinion, is Catras and Blazhound Noct, who each increase the drop rates from neutral PALs. And the reason that they're so much more relevant than the others is because they will increase the amount of dog coin that you get when you kill Memogs, which is currently the only material that's still really worth farming from PALs in the wild. However, I've still included the full list because who knows what Pocket Pair will add in the future, and we might get some new items that only drop from a particular PAL, which will cause us to want some of these other ones. But that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed the list, and let me know in the comments down below if there's any PALs that you think I left off the list which needed to be included. But otherwise, thank you all for watching. I'll catch you guys next time. Have a good one.